Hello, Trauma Thrivers. Welcome, Thursday night. Lovely to see you.
Hello,
we've got some familiar faces and we've got some new faces. So delighted to introduce a dear friend of mine and colleague, much trusted and respected colleague, Robin Lefever, to the group. And Mel, I think we're excited about this one, aren't we, in seeing Robin?
Yeah, really looking forward to this. Really just, it's going to be a great discussion. So yeah.
Me too. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pleasure. And it is a really good topic, Robin, and who better to speak about it than you, really. We're going to talk about the pros and cons, the benefits of residential treatment and rehab, and hope that some of you are watching live and you can ask some questions or get involved at the end. But before we start, would you, Robin, just mind saying a little bit about your background and who you are?
Sure, yeah. So well,
those that are watching,
very briefly.
know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So very briefly, thank you both again. You know, because I'm a big fan of you guys as well and everything you do. So it's lovely to be invited here today. So I suppose I should say I have something of a poacher turned gamekeeper, in the sense that I've been through treatment. I was mentioning just before we went live a few times, both here and in the States. And so, you know, I guess I kind of have an understanding from both sides. I also have I think, as many people do, a long family history of addiction and trauma. And I think it's one of the questions we're going to come to. I think the way that treatment has evolved, it has changed a hell of a lot through the years, and thankfully, really. But at the same time, I suppose I shouldn't be, too critical of what went before, because it was that or nothing pretty much in the days that I went through. And it got me here wherever I am. So I'm still grateful for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I suppose, like, my first, just very quickly, I went through loads of schools and, had all sorts of educational difficulties. And then having dropped out because of drink and drugs, I went to work in the city, which is out of the frying pan into the fire, really.
Yeah, isn't it just crazy? Yeah.
And like, I was already, I think my first treatment episode was in an adolescent unit in America. So I got in young. I was then, like, completely blown apart by that career. It was just such an unhealthy, work to be doing anyway. And at the end of that, and my sort of final treatment episode of many, I kind of wanted to do something, different. I didn't just want to, the first times I went through treatment, I just wanted to sort of cope with the symptoms. I wanted to, say, stop the drink and drugs, for example, and feel better, but not really do any sort of, like, deeper work or make any significant changes. And then I think that one of the sort of differences at the end was that I realized that kind of virtually everything in my life was kind of quite unhealthy, really. And I'd lost a lot. I felt like I was on some sort of mission, but in reality, I'd been robbed of, my education and, culture, friends. Just became, I wanted to sort of really find out, it's a cliche, isn't it? I wanted to find out who I was, but, and also get back all these things and have these experiences that other people had kind of had that I'd missed out on. And then that was a blessing, because I think, going out and being kind of interested in the world and interested in, sort of education and culture and all the rest of it, I think that kind of lit a fire for me. And, and pretty quickly I got interested in psychology, obviously being by that point in recovery. So I went and studied psychology. Mostly to be a student for 3 years, to be honest. I was still such a hippie. I didn't really want to take my final exam because I thought that was just a meaningless piece of paper, whereas it was all about the experience, man. But nonetheless, I did do my final exams in psychology and loved it, really. And then came into the sort of field. My parents, quite well known for their involvement in having set up the rehab. So I'm sort of a second generation in this field, and I'm
Mm.
looking at, you know, four children, so the odds are good
Yeah.
for them being a third generation.
Third generation.
We've got our eyes on them, you know.
Yeah.
We're marking them out.
Yeah.
And you know, so, and then I think I've been blessed really in working in this area, because as I always say, I like, you know, I'm working in a field I love, with people I love, for people I love. You know, it's just, I couldn't be more blessed in that way. I mean, and also I feel like, although we've come a long way, I hope that we're still at the beginning of our learning. I mean, I feel like that's one of the really exciting things about this area, that there's so much better that we could do. There's so much more that we can learn. Yeah. And it's a journey, I think, as therapists, that we're kind of on together. You know, I mean, that was, I'm trying to think now, it must have been sort of like 32 years ago or something, that last treatment episode. And yet, you know, I've been back in therapy again recently, trying out somatic experiencing, and I'm loving that. I've done a course on it, and I'm possibly going to sign up and do the training.
Fantastic.
I've also been really into IFS. I mean, I come back to that several times because I love it. But, you know, it's interesting how there's just such a richness of approaches and ideas and ways of working and levels of working that I just can't imagine ever being, you know, ever being tired of it. It's always inspiring. It's always interesting. And it's nice to be able to be trying things for myself. And then, you know, if I'm working with a client, I can say, you know, listen, although we're maybe doing an EMDR session or something, why don't you chat with Aaron? I really like this somatic stuff, and I've been trying it myself. And there's some, you know, maybe we can top and tail the EMDR session with some somatic stuff, you know. And I think, yeah, it's just such a rich area. And I'm excited by it still.
Yeah, it is massively exciting. And it's a bit like, I don't know whether you ever saw that ebook that I did, the free ebook on the 56 solutions to trauma, and obviously somatic experiencing and IFS, which is internal family systems, for anybody listening that doesn't know, is in there. But also what's in there, Robin, and, you know, you have got one of the top and the best, and your family have always had, is residential treatment and rehabs. So, you know, which are a really important part for a lot of people of their treatment experience. So I guess coming back to your story a bit first, where I'm curious is, what was it like 30 years ago for you going into adolescent treatment, or America, or that treatment experience? And then maybe Mel, your experience too. I'm sat here jealously listening to you both, because unfortunately I never got treatment. I mean, I have had treatment, for anybody that's listening that thinks I never had treatment. I haven't just come off the street, but I didn't actually have the experience of, sadly, being somewhere. So I don't know whether we could bring people into what it was like for you both, and then into kind of the present moment a bit, with how have we learned, what have we learned, what was it like?
Well, I think there were good and bad bits. I mean, I think one of the things is that treatment in those days was very long. I mean, people would typically go in for sort of 3 months, would be a short stint of treatment. 6 months or, you know, a year was very common.
You see, I quite like that though. I quite like that. So the trauma clinician in me goes, oh, wonderful. If you had somebody, not for the 28 days, but you had them for, think how much work you could actually get done.
Yeah.
I'm in two minds, because
Are you?
Well, yeah, because I think, I love that. And as you know, when I had the clinic at Witherspoon, I had it set up so that we had, you know, primary stage, which was 28 days, then secondary, which would be the next 3 months, and then sober living, which was another sort of, you know, people could stay there for a year or two. I think the maximum was 2 years.
Amazing.
So that was lovely. And I definitely see the benefits of that. But I think the downside of those very, very long-term treatments is that it then presents a barrier to a lot of people to coming into treatment. And what I want to do is to sort of encourage people to say, listen, give treatment a try, you know, go in and try something for a week, or just try a different therapist, you know, don't feel that you're sort of stuck with one treatment center or one therapist, you know, shop around and try different people, try different therapies, become inquisitive about it. And I think, you know, if people become inspired that way, if they have a good experience, you know, and I think one of the things that happened sort of 30 to 40 years ago is that a lot of treatment centers were very controlling. So it was all about this idea of sort of breaking people down and then building them back up. But, you know, that was never a good plan.
No.
You know, you've got severely traumatized people, you know, then coming into a traumatic treatment experience. I mean, I seriously think people needed, you know, treatment for some of the treatment, to be honest, that went on. I mean, that's the worst of it. I mean, there were good experiences too, but I mean, I remember being in I'm just trying to not identify the clinic, but I remember, I don't think they're around anymore anyway, but I was in a group where people were sort of, you know, spitting on the floor and, you know, getting ready to say that they wanted to get back into old behavior and shoot some kneecaps off. And it was like, yeah, we're really going to do some like sort of deep emotional work here in this kind of environment. And also you had to, show my age, you had to part the sort of fog of smoke. So, you know, I really kind of question how much, and also there was this sort of, there was a bit of a cult-like atmosphere around it, in the sense that, you know, people had to learn the same mantras, and there's a bit of, you know, kind of commonality and bonding that happens about that, but there's also an awful lot of sort of deceit and lying. And, you know, people would sort of go through the clinics and, you know, be, you know, using all over the place, but if they didn't get caught, then that was okay, you know, and yet they'd be sort of judges and execute. And I think the way that women got treated in treatment as well was very bad. If there was ever a relationship in treatment, you know, kind of the woman would stereotypically automatically be blamed for having, you know, kind of driven the man off course, or even if it wasn't as badly gender biased as that, there was still a sort of dynamic of looking to see who was the sort of guilty party who led the other person astray. It's like, no, you know, so no, I mean, I wasn't, I do think, you know, yes, if you can have that time, you can take the time, but I think having sort of shorter treatment experiences and having more of them means that people ultimately come into recovery at a much earlier stage. If you say to somebody, you can't come into treatment unless you go in for 6 months, people will wait until they need to go into treatment for 6 months. Whereas if you can say, look, here's an experience that you can just try. If you're, I mean, I love that. There's a lady I saw speak who read a book called Sober Curious, and it's like, yeah, you know, be treatment curious, be therapy curious, just try it out. And then I think, you know, the most exciting part of this work is seeing how early we can help people, the earliest stages we can get people in. I'm imagining, Mel, you were you know, quite a bit later than me going into treatment, so hopefully none of those, you know, sort of awful sides.
Yeah, no, my treatment experiences were sort of 6-7 years ago, so yeah, sort of quite recent, really, in the grand scheme of things. And I mean, I've got to say, Robin, hearing you talk about your experience 30 years ago, it wasn't that different, and it wasn't hugely different. I think that with anything, with any kind of inpatient treatment, there is always, as we were discussing before, there are pros and cons to it. And for me, I needed to be removed from society. I could not stop drinking and using, left out in society, around the people that I was around, doing the things that I was doing. And the truth of it is that treatment, even though I didn't stay clean when I left, I still believe that the times that I went in saved my life at that point. Because I was going down a dark path very, very fast. And the interventions that I had were at quite a late stage in my recovery, in my using. But I think that it is about, I think what you said is really interesting about being treatment curious, because all treatment centers are different, and I had a different experience at everyone I went to. I say everyone, that makes it sound like I went to millions. I didn't. I went to But I have to say that the bit that I found tricky, and I mentioned this before, was always the reintegration when I left treatment, and then the reintegration back into kind of real life, because you are in a bubble when you're in inpatient treatment, and you do make very close friends and form these very strong bonds with people, and you're kind of on a bit of a, I think you get on a bit of a pink cloud in some ways when you're in treatment, because you are so protected. So for me, my most successful treatment was when I was in treatment for 3 months, and I went from primary treatment into a kind of secondary treatment where I had a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more freedom, and it was kind of like stepping stones. And I think, like, I would now use the word titration almost, you know, it's kind of like dripping little bits of real life back in to see how I coped. And there were times in secondary treatment where I was like, I need to go back into primary, like I can't do this. But yeah, I mean, there was still that element of it being a little bit controlling. I still don't think at that point the treatment centers that I was in were trauma informed enough. Even though, having said that, I had the most amazing therapists who actually were pivotal in helping me to realize the link between my trauma and addiction, and got me on the trauma healing path. So for that, if nothing else, that absolutely was what saved my life. So yeah, some similarities, shall we say, in my experience. But what I was really interested to ask you, Robin, is when do you think it is the right time for somebody to go into treatment? Because I kind of feel there's always this sort of argument, I guess, that somebody has to be ready. I don't think I don't think it needs to be that somebody needs to be ready. I think get them through the door as soon as possible, even if it sows a seed for them. I think that is great. But there is this kind of argument of, well, there's no point in somebody going to treatment unless they are ready to go. Well, what does that mean? And what are your views on that?
Well, I like the research of John F. Kelly. You can Google him at Harvard Medical, and he did a lovely study where he looked at how long it takes from the first point when people think they might have a problem until they seek the first sort of help, which is on average about 5 years. And then he said that it then takes a further, oh God, I'm going to get the figures slightly wrong here. So, but it was about another 5 years until, from the first time people had a treatment episode until the time when they were successfully able to achieve a year's sobriety. And he prefaced that by saying, look, they had a long periods of sobriety in that time, but then they would lapse and it would take them, you know, a few more efforts to get to the point where they could get another year's sobriety. And then he said that it was a further, I think it was 8 years until their risk of relapse was less than the risk of a regular person developing an alcohol problem. So in other words, he felt that was the point when they got back to normal. The point is that there's that long cycle. And I think one of the problems with clinics is that they try to sort of sell themselves on this idea that there's a definitive treatment episode that's going to be the treatment episode. And I don't really believe in that. I think that's why I like the idea that people can actually try and experience treatment. And then as they get a better and better experience, and that's why I feel that those experiences, it's really important that the clinic isn't controlling. I mean, not just for the sort of trauma-informed basis, but also you want someone to have an inspiring, interesting experience, you know. And there's a sense in which, I'm going to jump off a little bit here, but you know, there's a dynamic that goes on from, they talk about it in transactional analysis, this idea that we all have these ego states of a parent ego state, an adult ego state, and a child ego state. And of course, when we're ill and we're chaotic, we're a little bit in our child ego state. The problem is that if we're in either parent or child, whenever we're talking to the other people, we will sort of push them into that opposite state. So if somebody comes up to you and they're in a kind of authoritarian way, you're likely to say, yeah, exactly. So, you know, you're likely to have a childish response back to them. And the problem in a clinic is that if people are ill and they're maybe acting out a little bit sometimes, there can be a tendency for the clinic staff to want to go into that authoritarian parental ego state. And that's the mistake. That's the mistake. We have to come back every time as an adult and treat people constantly as an adult. I mean, that even if you feel somebody isn't 100% committed, the fact is they're voting with their feet. It's really tough. I remember all of those treatment experiences were really tough. If you're going to get up in the morning having put away everything that you used to cope with, and you're going to go in and you're going to try and deal with some of these really difficult emotions, I mean, I can't think I've ever done anything more difficult in my life. And so I think it's really important to respect that people always have a choice. And that's why I reflect back on those clinics from sort of 30, 40 years ago. And I think that whole thing about the control was an illusion.
Yeah.
People actually just did what they wanted anyway, which was either to go forward into recovery or to mess around a bit.
Yeah.
And I think rather than pretending, I mean, if controlling really worked, the jails would be drug-free, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So let's just give up on that idea and instead focus on how do we inspire people? Because even at my most belligerent and difficult, I know there was always inside a part of me that was hurt and frightened. And, I was talking with a colleague of mine earlier who was doing some sort of child work. And he was saying that, a client had been quite kind of like, he felt that there was a great deal of sort of hostility, overtly and covertly, at the beginning of this session. And then halfway through, the client just had this massive breakthrough and was, in floods for the rest of the session. And that's, I think, the thing we have to have in our minds the whole time. If you're seeing difficult behavior, is that behind that, there is also somebody who's really vulnerable, who actually really wants help, no matter how difficult they're being at that particular moment.
And often the more difficult they're being, the more help they need. I mean, that's what
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's funny, you get into sort of like a dynamic in the families as well, where we're told that we should be, really laying down the law. And it's like, well, you've been laying down the law for like 25 years. How's that been going for you?
Yeah, exactly.
That brings us on to another point that I think, sorry if I could just divert for it, I think there's another big miss that we have in our field is not working systemically. I mean, not working with the whole family, and that, everybody says they do, but they really don't. And then when they do, it feels like it's really just quite patronizing, or people are being told that they need to stop enabling and let go, and really unhelpful stuff. Actually, we need to heal the whole family system. The whole family are struggling. They all have their own trauma, and very commonly, when we're talking about trauma, there are multi-generations of trauma. I think people like, gosh, I'm trying to remember, I've forgotten her name for a second now, but there's somebody who's been championing this for absolute, decades and decades. Judith, sorry. And her work, I think, is amazing, doing sort of genograms with clients and asking them to look at the kind of values in the family, because no matter how chaotic our families have been, if you look back, there are also certain values and certain strengths that have come from the survival of generations of traumatic experiences. And I think we want to be healing that, and we want to be connecting that with families, whereas I so often see clinics almost facilitating a breakup in the families, and I think it's really wrong. So that's something I really want to work on.
Isn't it? The advocacy of tough love is what I
hear. It's disaster, isn't it?
It's
so wrong.
And it literally kind of makes me go like that when I hear that phrase, tough love. I'm kind of like, you can't, it almost doesn't, you can't have tough and love in the same in the same sentence. I just want to go back, Lou, there was something you said before about being jealous of us having had that inpatient treatment. And I'm wondering, I don't think this is a question I've ever asked you before. What do you think would have been different for you had you have had the opportunity of inpatient treatment?
Well, I suppose if I'd have had inpatient treatment, I would have had it at 24 years of age when I went into a Horton psychiatric clinic and was sectioned. And from the ages of 24, pretty much until I worked at the Priory, which was, I don't know, however many years later, quite a few, there was never any mention of the word trauma. So I never knew about trauma, and I really didn't even know about addiction or anything like that. I was, according to Horton, I just had psychosis. I'd had a psychotic break. So I think if I'd have had treatment somewhere good, like, you know, that would have mentioned, oh, have you looked at this intergenerational trauma? Do you know anything about family systems? Oh, your addiction maybe could be causal or caused by all of this untreated trauma. I think I'd probably have saved myself about 15 years.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm sure there's lots of people listening out there that feel similarly, or haven't been able to afford treatment, or haven't been able to get there. And, you know, I'm also of the belief that we get there when we get there, you know, at the right time and the right speed for us. But when you were both talking too, for me, what really came up about the experiences, and you know, having worked at the Priory for what, a decade, and on the addiction treatment unit for 8 years, I think what came up for me is, in the old days, it was a bit tough. It was a bit, if people, you know, don't come out of their rooms and they don't go to groups, and what's the consequences? And actually now it makes me cringe a bit, knowing what we know about safety. And safety and relationship, and about how to, you know, attune and connect to people and be there, whatever part of themselves they're in, whether they're in their own critical parent or their own adapted, angry, raging teenager. You don't meet that with anything other than safety.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and also I think, you know, I think about this a lot. I think the safer you make the place, the safer the therapy space is, the more likely those parts are also to come out. I also think that's actually a sign of good work. That somebody can actually risk to do that work. So
I always say to clients, and I wonder what you think about this too, Robin, is I'm a great believer in inpatient and residential treatment, because I know, and I've seen with people over the last 2.5 decades, that if I can send somebody into somewhere like you and they do a month, or they do 3 months, or they do shorter or longer, even a week, in that condensed, safe place with other people and a community, and doing 7 or 8 hours of work sometimes a day, I can't do that as a one-to-one therapist in 1 hour a week. I just can't do that. So it's really beneficial for a lot of people, I think, to have that on the front or the middle or 2/3 of the way through, to go into that sort of environment.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, it is an amazing, I mean, I think it is an amazing opportunity. I do spend a lot of time knocking rehab, so I probably should fly the flag a bit. But I do think, I mean, I also think it's great to be able to work in this way, because I think when I'm, you know, if I'm working with EMDR or something, I'll be saying to somebody, you know, as I said earlier, you know, listen, you should really do some SE work with Aaron. I mean, you know, have you tried that out? Or, you know, have you tried the equine assisted psychotherapy? Have you worked with the horses at all yet? And I love it that kind of after a session of EMDR, somebody can go and kind of decompress, and they don't have to actually do therapy with the horses, but they can just go and be with the horses. And that's really healing. And the fact that there is this sort of 24-hour support, you know, we've got 24-hour nursing, we've got 24-hour waking staff. So, you know, and you've got the other peers there all the time as well. We've got therapists there until 10 o'clock each night. So, you know, if you find that there's a particular moment, because that's how it happens, doesn't it? That, you know, something just comes up, and it's such a privilege, I agree, both as a client, but also as a therapist, to have that whole team working at the same time, and a whole patient group and therapy group of therapists as well, because they're all different characters. And I really like that, just as the client group are all different characters. And we sort of make the oddest family ever, kind of collectively, but it's
absolutely. And I think, I mean, treatment was so, it was very stabilizing for me. It was very, very healing for me. And I always say this, that I laughed and cried in equal measures when I was in treatment. And I think that both of those things were just as important, because I had spent a lot of years not laughing or crying. And one of the things that inpatient treatment gave me was that safe holding to be able to do both, actually, and to be able to be vulnerable in my wounded child parts, but also to be vulnerable in my fun, free parts. And that was something that I never felt I had in the outside world. So there are so many benefits to inpatient treatment in so many respects. But not everybody can afford it. And I think that's what saddens me, really, is how, I think years ago, I remember when my brother was in treatment, which was closer to the time you were, Robin, and there was a lot more kind of funding available for treatment. It was easier to get people in. So for people that can't afford that it's not accessible, it's not available to them to go into inpatient treatment, what would your guidance, advice be for what people could do instead?
I mean, firstly, I would say that, it's not a necessity treatment at all. I really don't want people to think it is. I think it's a blessing. I think it's a leapfrog. It has all these benefits, but it's not a necessity. And I don't want people to ever think that, because I think it's kind of akin a little bit to the similarity between, let's say, sort of, self-learning or open university versus going to a college. When you go to a college, you get something extra of being in an intense environment with lots of other people at the same time, and it's probably a sort of slightly faster accelerator process. But before I went to university, I was embarking on a self-learning process. I was going to, for the first time in my life, having messed up my education. But, I loved that. It was such an exciting time. And I think I would encourage people to do the same things, to try and think about, well, what does a treatment center provide? How could I achieve those same things, at home? How could I build a similar type of program at home? What are the elements of it, And I think, there's a lot of kind of stuff that people don't realize around sort of self-care and stuff like that. So, for example, having the sort of, the massage and the beautician and the hairdresser and stuff. I remember one of the most significant interventions they made with me when I was in one of my treatment episodes was to make me go to the local town and buy some clothes, because I'd come in dressed like a hippie and a tramp, cross between the two, and I was just like, I was wearing how I felt, and I carried on kind of living in that. And I think, at the time when we're really low, we tend to want to kind of push ourselves and punish ourselves and think only about what we must do. And I think the self-care stuff and the nurturing is almost more important than that kind of sort of driven stuff. So I think you can try to create, it'd be a slightly slower process, but it'll be very unique. And I don't want people to think in any way. And it's particularly sort of, sad at the moment. We're going into a horrible economic time. It's even less affordable for people. So, I wish equally it was more available on the NHS and through other sources. But yeah, I think people can create a program, and I think the thing is that people are, that's something I always try to sort of affirm my clients about, is that they are already, I mean, by the time they're even in front of any of us, I think they're already on a mission to bring themselves into recovery, and it's almost a done deal. Now, it might happen slightly sooner or slightly later, and they might have some hiccups along the way. But really, they're already long on that path by the time they see us. That's why I refer back to that John Kelly study. Really, actually, there is this long path that we don't realize. It's not clinics that are making these amazing interventions that are suddenly curing people. It's people are coming to clinics on a path that they're already on, and that clinic is hopefully accelerating and facilitating what they're already doing.
Yeah,
That's very much how I see it.
beautifully put. Is there a way in your mind for the future of both addiction and trauma treatment that will facilitate or help to facilitate more people's journeys? And let's say in any way, shape or form. So even, you know, not in an affordable form, and then maybe we'll go on to the affordable form later. But I guess what I'm asking is, how do you see it working now? What's the future for? And when I say clinic or treatment centres, I mean trauma and addiction treatment centres, I think.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I think actually the future will be more social change. I think that there will be socially based treatment. I mean, I love the work of you know, sort of the various sort of cafes and hubs, recovery hubs that people go to. But I think that that's the beginning. I mean, they're little oases. I think it can go much further. I think you could actually work with people in their existing whole family and social system. I mean, it's almost like, you know, we've been shy and ashamed of the problems that we've had, but that is, I mean, it's changing, and it's brilliantly changing. I'm loving the representation that we have on, you know, in TV programs and stuff like that now. And I think that's creating an awareness that would make it possible for people not necessarily to need to go away to clinics, but actually, you know, I remember I was talking with, you know, the interventionist Brad Lamb, and, you know, he was doing an intervention in New York, and he basically had worked with everybody around the guy that he was working with. So literally, you know, the guy would go to the off license, and the off license wouldn't serve him, and, you know, he'd go and score. I mean, like back in the days when I was doing drugs, I had a dealer who actually went to my dad and said that they were worried about me. I mean, it's like, it's really bad. But, you know, even in the community of other people using, you know, we can see when people are hurting and when people, you know, need help. And, you know, this idea that actually somebody in their home community, everywhere they went, would be met by, but not just like the just saying no thing. It's also like, actually, dude, why don't you come in and hang with us for the day? Why don't you come out with us for the day? Why don't you stay here? And I think if you could get the whole community healing people, that would be my vision for where this whole field will go in, I hope, you know, as soon as possible. But I think there'll still be a place for, you know, psychiatric services and residential services, but hopefully for more of the sort of acute, shorter treatments, and more will be possible in the community with better support and better understanding.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I love that.
I think we've talked about like addiction and trauma, but also, you know, other mental health issues. And I think, you know, one of the beauties of the sort of self-help groups is that people go in and they have a community. But one of the difficulties is that people sometimes get sort of tied to a narrative that, you know, they've got so many years of clean time and so on and so forth. And you don't know what else is going on with them, you know, how desperate they've become, what, you know, depressive episodes they're having. And I think that's a difficulty that I see. And, you know, there was, I'm going to not remember the study properly now, but there was a study that was reported last year, just of the sheer number of people with addiction issues who then later on have a catastrophic, you know, mental health episode as well. I mean, and so I feel like, I mean, what we've tried to do is to try to support all of these issues at the same time. So people are learning in the therapy sessions with us about, you know, depression and trauma and anxiety and all the different forms of compulsive behaviors, and to have that kind of understanding all in one place. I think it's really important, especially to address sort of, well, yeah, not to get too tied to a narrative of, oh, you know, I've stopped taking one particular drug for 20 years. Well, so what? You know, I mean, not so what, sorry. You know, of course, that's a great achievement. But, you know, at the same time, if somebody's in, you know, absolute desperate, you know, states with their sort of depression and anxiety and other problems, it can be hard for them to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think
And I think
the issue is the problem that happens is that people put the drink and the drugs down, and that's when they realize that all these other things are there, because that's when, the way that I describe it, that's when the trauma kind of actually appears, is when it's not being medicated anymore.
Yeah.
When we stop numbing and distracting with the, you know, the habits or the drink or the drugs or the processes, that's when it all comes to light. And the amount of people that I see that have actually been clean and sober or free from their addictive processes for a number of years and end up having psychotic breaks, or end up, you know, in really severely dysregulated and traumatized states, because they're not numbing it anymore. It's there. Exactly. You can't run from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there is sometimes some shame that is attached to admitting, when you've been clean and sober for a while, that you're not actually doing that great.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing I'm getting to, really, is that, you know, I understand the idea of kind of wanting to inspire other people that it's possible, and that's very valid. And, you know, just you know, deserves to be applauded for any time that people have got. But, you know, it's so important to also be able to acknowledge that other stuff that's going on, that, you know, yeah, I mean, I had a friend I used to go to meetings with who would, you know, forever be, you know, if people, he was about sort of, he was 10 years more clean time than me, and he would sort of like, people would sort of get a little bit rah-rah, and then he'd sort of go, oh, I was playing golf yesterday, and then I looked at the train line and I realized I could cut my way through there and I could throw myself in front of that next train. I mean, and he was, you know, quite actively depressive from time to time and would have horrible episodes. But I absolutely loved the fact that he had the courage to, you know, in spite of whatever it was, sort of 40 odd years of sobriety, to actually share that in a meeting. And I thought, yeah, thank you for saying that, and letting people know that it's okay to also have all of those other struggles, no matter how much, you know, sobriety and clean time you've got.
Yeah. It always seems to be one layer after another. And I know that we've got maybe slightly different views. I think we've got very similar views on lots of things, or on the majority of things. But I always, for me, I think that we've got layers and layers and layers of what I call trauma, and maybe it's not actually trauma, and maybe that's not a good word. Maybe it's more chronic stress, or different parts, or different belief systems, and I think they go over time. I don't think they go in our first 5 years or 10 years or even 15, 20 years of sobriety. I think we are always works in progress, personally.
Yeah, good. Yes, I agree. Absolutely. No, it's funny. I was doing this somatic work, and I saw, you know, Cosmo Duff Gordon at the Start to Stop in London. And he said, Robin, have you got taller? And I was like, no, actually, I've been doing this somatic work. And one of the things is I have to become aware, because I do, you know, slouch and stuff, and to actually sort of hold myself. And
yeah,
I think it is having an effect. And I love the fact that, you know, whatever it is, sort of 30 years or 30 plus years in, there's still new stuff to explore and experience, and gains to make. And I think the other side is also true. I'm not sure that it's always a linear progress. I mean, I remember I had a massive depressive episode, like about sort of 15 years into sobriety, and you know, that nearly carried me off. So, you know, and I think, so I think it's sort of, it ebbs and flows. And I think, you know, if somebody has, you know, has had a mental health problem, they are more vulnerable. And that's why I'm a bit kind of like jaded about the sort of the rah-rah message of everything's always sort of relentlessly good. And it's like, no, it'll ebb and flow. I mean, it's still a fantastic experience and process and etc. But there'll be some really grim times in there. And there's not always that much we can do about it. I mean, sometimes it's like biorhythms. It's just something so random to why we get, why I've been kiboshed, I feel, from time to time by, you know, my mental health.
Listen, I think it's about realism, isn't it? It's about life, and it's about, you know, we can be in our functional adult self when we put down our drink and our drugs and our addictions, and, you know, we can start to process and metabolize our trauma. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an adapted and a wounded part there occasionally that can rear its head. You know, we're not completely I haven't reached complete enlightenment yet, where there's like one fully integrated whole with no limiting beliefs left whatsoever. God, if only, eh? I don't know. I don't know if only, actually, because I don't know what would
I like those parts of me. I've grown to love those parts. I don't ever want to see them gone. They serve me sometimes still.
Yeah.
Well, Groucho Marx said, "Blessed are the cracked, for they let in the light."
Oh,
I'm living by that.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? It's lovely. So what next for you, Robin? Where are you taking the clinics, and what are your plans for the future, and where are you heading now?
I mean, my interest will be around that social stuff, to be honest. That's my big interest in the next sort of 10 years, I guess. I think the clinics will kind of say, you know, in a similar vein, it's not like I'm thinking there won't be a need for rehab, but I think that's one of the frontiers. And the other frontier that I think's super interesting is how you get that initial germ going, you know, of an idea of an inspiration to maybe try something different. See, I think, as I said before, by the time somebody comes to a clinic, they're already long on a path. But how do we get that earlier point? How do we get, you know, help people take that very first step, be curious? So that would be what would be interesting for me.
Maybe it's
about you guys?
More about destigmatizing what's left or around mental health or around trauma, or educating people more around the nervous system and getting it into schools and younger and family systems, you know, so it's not so so people understand why they're doing what they're doing. I don't think there's enough trauma-informed awareness out there. I think we've done quite well with the mental health stuff, but for me, all the mental health stuff sits under the trauma banner, because it's all about the nervous system, isn't it, really, and how we stay with ourselves or we disconnect from ourselves. So I'd love to see more education of like the masses around that, really.
And I think if we can give them an experience somehow, like micro experiences, that would be, you know, because I think I was thinking that sort of Ali G doing the sort of education to the police officer, and he goes, "Yeah, well, which is the good stuff? Which is the good stuff?" And it's like, so it's like, I want them, you know, I want somehow for people to have some kind of an experience and to like really feel it. And I think if they really feel something changing, then they'll keep going with it. And that's how do we give them that first thing. What about you guys? I mean, I'm amazed. I mean, you're doing what I'm talking about, what I'm dreaming of in the community. You guys are really doing it. So well done you. Where do you see your work evolving?
Mel, do you want to go first?
Well, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, Lou. I mean,
say whatever you like. There's no control here. We're all trauma informed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Lou and I have got some really exciting stuff in the pipeline, Robin. And one of the things which Lou was just talking about was this education piece, which is getting more people trauma informed, so that and especially people that are already working with dysregulated, vulnerable, traumatized people, people that are already therapists, coaches, healers in some respect, and just helping them to help their clients feel safe, and not feel like with the way that they experience life is abnormal. because I think that is just so important to normalize people's experiences, to help people to feel safe, and to really just inform people what trauma actually is, because I think there's still people just still don't understand, people still don't understand it, and they still don't know how to, I think deal with it is not quite the right word, but how to contain it.
And
would that be sort of schools? Sorry, just to finish with, is that schools you're thinking of, or is it broader society?
I mean, I would like I mean, Mel says coaches and all the rest of it, but you know, I'm thinking about social workers, I'm thinking about nursery nurses, I'm thinking about a client told me today about an experience with a police officer. You know, there are lots of different people, I think, that work with people that need to understand about safety. Just that word we keep coming back to, safety and connection, safety and connection. So if us guys with our experience of trauma and addiction can just help more people work with people so that they do feel safe and connected, but I just think that would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, that's what I'd
and I think they would be so willing. I mean, you know, all of the sort of frontline workers, you know, they've gone to that work generally because they want to help. So, you know, they'd love to have.
I'm not quite sure how. I think they get to a certain point where all the training that you've done isn't sufficient anymore. And then, of course, as Lou and I do, just helping people to thrive. It's you know, that's always been Lou's vision and mission, and I've sort of tagged along on the coattails for the journey. And we'll be bringing people some really exciting programs to move, because there's this second part of the trauma healing journey. Once that you put the addiction and the processes down, and you can move through that initial part where you're more stabilized, it's about then living your best life and coming into yourself, and that relationship that you build with yourself, and putting yourself out there in the world. And I think that's what Lou and I are also just so passionate about, is really helping people to get to that next phase, where they are just, they're comfortable with themselves, and they're thriving.
You were talking a few months ago about like another part to your program and developing it. Has that happened? Fantastic.
Great. So the whole program in its entirety is called the Voyage.
Oh, great. Okay.
Nice. So it's all a nautical sea journey. I have to do everything via metaphor. You know, putting the water on and all the rest of it. And literally the first 8 waves of it really are the kind of stabilization and psycho ed, and learning about the nervous system, and coming into the body and starting to be able to swim and get used to the emotions and the sensations in the body. So, and I'm going to be teaching that. In fact, we are teaching that to an American recovery coach company in this year for 4 months. We're teaching their staff 16 half days of how to do the Voyage process. And then the last part of the Voyage, Mel and I are going to be teaching 2 coaches, therapists, body workers, social workers, healers, that want to do the thriving end of trauma. So it's the stuff that I found really hard, Robin. I don't know about you, but I mean, I really struggled with this, which is, you wouldn't believe it now, she says, finding my voice, being able to even speak. God, I was terrified for years. Finding our value and being able to ask for money or what we're worth. That's a really tricky one in trauma recovery. Being able to validate ourselves and let go of the codependency a bit. Being visible. It's always a work in progress, the code stuff. being visible and putting ourselves out there, and then helping people. What's their vision? What do they want to do? What do they see? So that's what we're excited about. And the whole thing together is 14 stages, and one day it will be an online trauma treatment program, one day, because I would love to do something. I've always said to you, I want to do something that's affordable.
Yeah, absolutely.
That they could do in tandem with a treatment center or in tandem with therapy. So, for an affordable rate.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's one of the things that's come out of the pandemic, isn't it? That we have learned to do this, to connect, albeit, virtually, but I still think there's a lot of promise in it. And I think it'd be great if you could do that.
Yeah. So we'll keep you posted, because
definitely I'll sign up, please. Put me, reserve me a spot, please.
You're already at stage 14.
No, I'm struggling. I'm doing, you talked about the first stages being, kind of working in the body. I mean, that's the bit that I'm working on at the moment. And I find it really, really hard. I mean, I mean, that's why I'm sort of, plowing into it even more and kind of going on to more courses and doing more sessions, because it's one of those weird things that work, that it seems to, other work I could see a more direct response. This seems to come out sort of like Cosmo pointing out that I was standing taller, or an awareness that I'm looking around in a different way or something. The body work is so fascinating, but I'm still really struggling with it. I really kind of like, my poor therapist must have like sort of patience of a saint, where are you feeling? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not feeling anywhere. I don't know.
I bet they have a joyous time with you.
I don't think it would feel right for us to end without you giving your treatment center a little bit of a plug, Robin, either. So for anybody that's watching and is thinking about inpatient treatment or has clients that perhaps need inpatient treatment, I would personally advocate yours. So tell us how.
Thank you.
Tell our audience how they can find you.
So I guess, I mean, the website is www.promise.co.uk. It's confusing because it's promise without an E, so it's just promis.co.uk. And my email's robin@promise.co.uk. So please, anyone feel free to ping me an email there. And please feel free to come and take a look. I think what I would say in summary about it is, actually, in fairness to my dad, he made the comment that what he wanted was a place that was like a university. He wanted somewhere that people could come and they would be, treated as adults and treated as in intelligent beings, which we are. And so, we have, people have Wi-Fi, they have their tablets, they have, I remember I was doing a group once where these trainees were there and they said, well, how do you stop people going to the pub? And I said, look, I was taking this group. So I said, okay, look, does everybody here know that the Royal Oak is like 2 miles that way? And does everybody know you could go for a drink and come back and I'll keep working with you? Yes. So why hasn't everybody gone? There's this, again, people are already do want to change things if they can just feel safe and respected. And so that's what I think we have, as well as thankfully beautiful Kent countryside. So please take a look, and thank you so much for I'm normally, like, if you look at my last 2 LinkedIn articles, I'm so kind of like normally kind of critical of of my sector. It was very strange to be actually putting forward a positive.
Well, maybe we're better, aren't we, sometimes at bigging up other people than we are ourselves. And you're very authentic, Robin, always. You've got such humility. And if I were listening to this and I wanted to send a family member or go somewhere myself, after what you said today, I would pick you every time. Absolutely.
Oh, that's really kind. Thank you. Well, thank you, both of you, also for your constant sort of warmth and encouragement. Every time I see you, any sort of like with conferences that we bump into each other, you're always so warm and encouraging. So equally, I would recommend any of my family to be seeing you. There's plenty of us in our family.
Loads of us to go round.
Yeah, there are.
Exactly.
And you too, Mel. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Guys, I hope that whoever's watching, whether you're watching it now or you're watching it later, you've enjoyed it and it's been useful. Robin is in the Trauma Thrivers Facebook group, very thankfully. So if you've got any questions to ask, I'm sure he won't mind answering them.
Yeah,
and if you're listening to this on a podcast later, come and join us in the Trauma Thrivers Facebook group, and then you can watch us live, which would be amazing. But for now, we're gonna love you and leave you. Have a great Thursday evening, and we'll be back very soon. Bye for now, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye bye.